All right, everyone, welcome back to the 2021 Standards Technology Forum. We have an exciting next session from BSI. So with that, I will hand it over to Simon Powell.
Hi there. Thank you, Lakshmi. Thanks for that. And welcome everyone to the next session with some new colleagues from BSI who've not necessarily been near to this event in the past. So really pleased to welcome them. I'll just give you a little bit of background. When we were organizing the event, we wanted to try and cast the net a bit wider and get a wider view and a different perspective on some aspects of digitization and what we mean by the digital world through the lens of standard. I think sometimes we have a preconceived notion of what digitization is, and that's sometimes a little narrow in the information and publishing space. So I was lucky enough to learn about two initiatives that BSI are doing that I thought would give us a different slant on what a digital world means for different communities around the world through that lens of standardization. So we've got two speakers today, Ben Headley, who's a senior project manager working on the Commonwealth Standards Network, and Cindy Parakill, who's a project manager working in our international project space. So I'll stop talking and I will start by handing over to Ben, who's going to talk to you about the Commonwealth Standards Network. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks very much, Simon. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me the time to speak today about the Commonwealth Standards Network. Like Simon says, I'm the senior program manager of the network, and I have been since its launch in 2018. I'll share my screen. I've got a few slides to share here. It's not letting me. The hosts, do you have my presentations to share, or can you allow me to share my screen, please?
Sure, go ahead again, Ben. Sorry about that.
Thank you. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. Oh, sorry, it's just gone away. There we go. So hopefully everyone sees this. Commonwealth Standards Network, abbreviated to CSN, because we do like an abbreviation, don't we? So I will start off with why the network was established, really on the assumption that the use of international standards helps facilitate trade, which leads to positive developmental outcomes. So that was really the foundation for the network, why it was brought together. It was the inception and the development of the network was funded by the UK government, UK aid budgets for BSI to look after the secretariat of the network and help develop it. This kick-started in 2018 when the UK held the Commonwealth Chair in Office, which it still holds at the moment. That's a rolling secretariat, whoever holds the chair in office. It will be Rwanda next. It had been planned for them to be taking over this year, but due to restrictions in meetings, the Commonwealth Head of Government meeting is likely to take place next year now, when the Secretariat of the Commonwealth Chair in Office will hand to them. So it's for those reasons that the UK government funded the Commonwealth Standards Network, basically on the assumptions that trade is beneficial for reducing poverty and for developmental goals. The use of standards assists trade. This figure we've got here is up to 80% of trade equivalent of about 4 trillion annually. $4 trillion is affected by standards and technical regulations. And the international standards provide additional benefits on top of what you would have from just having national or regional standards, largely in reducing barriers to trade. Obviously, if people are using the same standards, then it's one fewer hurdle to get through to be able to trade with your neighboring countries. I'm not sure if these slides, oh yeah, sorry, it looks like someone else is controlling it. So that's the slide I was just talking through. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the Commonwealth Standards Network, I won't go into huge details of what it is, but if anyone's interested, my details will be at the end and you can contact me. Basically, the membership is 52 countries around the Commonwealth and 31 associate members as well. Most of the 51 are NSBs or their equivalent, where there's a government department instead of an NSB. And the associate members are organizations such as regional standards organizations, intergovernmental organizations as well. So what we have been promoting is the increased participation in international standards development. So particularly ISO and IEC, trying to get more countries, particularly developing countries, involved in the development of international standards. So the content of them best suits them, so their views are represented, which will in turn lead to them to use international standards more widely. So we're also promoting just generally the use of international standards and the adoption of international standards throughout the world, particularly focused on developing Commonwealth countries though. So what we've done for that since 2018 is 65 training sessions to more than 1,800 delegates from 49 different countries. We've developed resources, written resources as well, that all feed into this training, good practice, good documents, guidelines for how to get more involved in developing international standards, how they can be used to support things like policy objectives, how the NSBs can better develop their business models to be more self-sufficient, and generally to increase the use of international standards. All of this leading to increased trade, economic prosperity, and positive developmental outcomes. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a bit about how we've specifically done this. So I'll skip through this, but very quickly, these are the 52 members, and this highlights one of the issues that we have, is that the 52 member countries are spread out, real geographic spread all around the world. Lots in Africa, also the Caribbean, but then also Pacific Islands, Australia, New Zealand, South Asia as well. So it's something where we really had to, right from the beginning, consider how we can communicate with all of these varied audiences, whether not all of them have got the same levels of technology use throughout the countries. There's also obvious differences with time zones and things like that. And there's budgets available to NSBs and how much they can travel or their stakeholders can be involved with things. So that's something we've had to consider from the beginning, this big geographic and cultural and economic spread of countries within the network. Of the 52 countries, 65 that are coloured in green are ones that received technical assistance to their NSBs and their stakeholders, which are sometimes government departments, sometimes private sector, people who are using standards and want to know more about them. And then there were 9 specific technical assistance programs as well that were embedded within the countries. You can't quite see them all on this map because some are small Caribbean and Pacific Islands, but I'll talk a bit more about those in a second. So next slide, please. So onto the use of technology and how we actually did this with the CSN's work. To begin with, what we'd always planned was was face-to-face meetings as side events of the ISO General Assembly, which we did do in 2018 and 19. But something that really changed everything for the CSN was obviously the last year and a half or so of travel restrictions. How we still had this fairly large, about £2.5 million per year UK aid budget to promote the use and development of international standards, but without being able to travel when a real bulk of the program was to deliver technical assistance or face-to-face training sessions to NSBs and their stakeholders. So one of the first things that changed with that was how we'd have our annual meetings. So in 2020 and 21, we took them online. So that's no big surprise to anyone on meetings like this, like how this has changed. But I think a couple of years ago, it was quite new doing these things and everyone had to jump at this. And that's worked out well. And I think it's actually enabled more participation from different countries around the Commonwealth. The last meeting we had more than 100 NSB attendees from across the Commonwealth. And when you're considering these are people from places like Pacific Islands, places in Africa where the NSBs don't have the budgets to send people to the ISO-GA always, we've actually increased our reach to participants for collaboration by taking meetings online. The other way that we've done this is through the collaborative resource development. We've had online surveys and engagement to continuously inform the work program and training content. We've had more than 100 separate surveys for this, which I'll go into detail a little bit more later of how we've done that. We've also developed the CSN website, which is an online portal that hosts news, events, and resources. And we've had sign up from 47 different countries for that. And we've developed a forum to encourage peer-to-peer collaboration and education. So different Commonwealth members can each log on to this forum to ask questions of each other, where they're in a similar position as NSBs, maybe in different parts of the world. They can talk to each other, learn from each other. So it's not all just coming from BSI for this. Something we did specifically as well was a COVID section, which has had more than 20,000 views, which included things like the standards that were made freely available in the last year or so, other things like sharing information from other NSBs, from ISO, from other organizations as well. What we also did was training sessions. To begin with, we planned on them all being face-to-face sessions, but over the last couple of years, they've gone online, which has meant we've actually been able to do double the amount of sessions in the 12 months from 2020 to 21 than was budgeted for. So we've got to double the amount of people by bringing the sessions online. Obviously, there are some constraints to that. It's not always quite as good as having face-to-face meetings, but we found that it has really opened up to quite large audiences how we can deliver these training sessions. We had people like the WTO, and we worked with ISO as well to deliver training on things like good standardization practices, or how standards can be used as a tool to support trade, to support policy objectives, and how it all fits within technical barriers to trade and within the sort of trade system. What we also developed, which was quite a new thing, which was just sort of pivoting on how we could deliver training, was 5 e-learning courses, all on these same sort of themes, released last year. And then all of our written resources, where we had planned to print everything, we started putting more publications just as online documents, with the reduced print costs, meaning that we could actually make more content as well. So there's some of the things that we did to spread the CSN's information across the Commonwealth using digital means, some of which we hadn't planned to at the beginning of the programme in 2018. Next slide, please. So these are just some screenshots really of what we use, the CSN portal, which hosts the forum, which is on the left, and you can see the different tabs we've got. It's a fairly simple system. Something we found is you can't go too in depth because you need to consider the bandwidth for everyone around the world to be able to view these things. So you can't have really fancy websites with lots of graphics, lots of videos and things, because people just can't access them. So you had to consider that with the development of everything being quite straightforward, and trying to put everything in one place, the CSN portal, where we have the e-learning, where we have all the documents to download, and trying to consider the audience for all of those and how they can access all of those things was quite a common thing that we went through. Next slide, please. Analytics, this is probably not news to any of you, but just how we did this in a fairly short time frame and how we answered to our government sponsors to report on what we did. We used InVision as a system to develop the CSN portal. You see on the left, that gives you some information about how you can look at who's using the site, how people are signing up to it, whether they're opting in to be able to get communications from you or not. Then we use Google Analytics to look at things like the unique page views and where in the world people were accessing the site from, which is that map in the bottom right. And then we've used Microsoft Forms for things like assessing the e-learning programs. So all of these helped us to report both to BSI, to the CSN membership, and to the UK government sponsors on these fairly simple statistics. But we found that these were good enough things, sort of off-the-shelf things, to be able to report on most of the things that we wanted to do for the programme. Next slide, please. I did mention the technical assistance programmes. These were the ones that you can see on the screen, the 9 different countries: Rwanda, Uganda, Zambia in Africa, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Belize and Dominica in the Caribbean, Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu in Oceania. All of these NSBs have got quite different needs. They're at quite different levels of development. We're also working with the regional organizations that you can see along the bottom to help in different ways. With some, like Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu, it was more at the stage of developing the NSBs, developing their standards catalogs, how they can adopt more international standards. A lot of the work in Africa was specific for agricultural and fishing sectors, a lot on disseminating the standards to the local population that it would be valuable for, say, so local fisher people and farmers, brochures of the standards and the key points from those standards to help them access different markets. And we've got various resources on to show you how that went about. But the part I'll talk about today is specifically the Caribbean and St. Lucia and some of the work we did with them. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So St. Lucia, just some of the work, there were a number of different things that happened, but work on the use of technology was that standards development publishing tools were used to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the standards development and the adoptions of international standards. So different tools for them to use as an NSB to get increased participation in standards development. We also helped them adopt 500 new international standards in 2020. So it was a big push to go a little bit away from national standards and use international standards where possible. And the use of technology in identifying those standards was quite a key part. And then we've upgraded the SLBS web store, which was launched this year, which provides improved access to standards to see where they're being developed, to get involved with standards development, but also to purchase standards, find out which standards would suit your business, and for SLBS to sell their services as well. So there's a few different sides to that. This is enabling or helping the NSB to be more self-sufficient and not need to take all the funding from government, to be able to make more money from the sale of standards and the sale of services, to be able to reach their customers. And it's also for their customers to be able to have easier access to international standards to see how it would fit within their business. And also the first part in getting wider demographics, different people getting involved in the development of standards and international standards as well to make them more suitable for them. So this increased sales helps SLBS improve St. Lucia's quality infrastructure system as a whole, and obviously all of this leading to increased trade productivity, which in turn leads to positive developmental outcomes. So that was really the whole picture of what CSN had been doing and continues to do. If we go to the next slide, please. These are just some screenshots of what they're doing, how the SLBS web store works, how you can buy services, how you can go through advanced searches for standards, how you can buy from their shop. So all of this follows that sort of same thing of increase the participation in the development of standards, adopt more international standards and get them used more, all of this increasing trade and having positive developmental outcomes. And that's really the picture across the CSN, and throughout we've used technology for various things, whether it's the things I was speaking about earlier to spread the information of what CSN is doing, or whether it's to help NSBs specifically spread the information on standards and standards development. So the CSN continues. We're looking into more aspects, working with different partners like Commonwealth Secretariat and the Institute for Collaborative Working, and working on things like Cindy is about to talk about, on how we can get more involved with digital production of standards, more involvement in adopting standards and the sale of standards as well. So the work continues. And if anyone has any more questions about any questions at all about the Commonwealth Standards Network, then please contact me. But with time being fairly short, I think that's just a very quick overview of quite a few years of work and quite a lot that's gone on with the CSN. So for now, I will leave it at that. But like I say, please let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks a lot, Ben. And yeah, if you can just hang around, we'll walk through what Cindy's going to talk about, and then hopefully we'll field a few questions towards the end of the session. And you made mention there a couple of times of the domain that Cindy's going to lead. So I think the two connect together quite nicely in some ways. So I'm going to hand straight over to Cindy, and she'll work through her piece, and then if people want to post their questions into the Q&A, we'll have some discussion afterwards. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Cindy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Parakill. I'll be presenting BSI's recent white paper on the role of standards in supporting the transition to a digital economy and facilitating digital trade, which I co-authored with my colleague, Alan Mayo. I just want to check, can you see the screen? Yes?
Everything
okay,
looks
see
good.
that Ben is nodding. Okay, super. Thank you. So, all right. So I'll start off by setting the scene by drawing your attention to the two charts on this diagram. So the diagram on the left shows the movement of data between regions. And what is clear is that developing countries are not really part of this global data flow. And the diagram on the right looks at the investment in digital infrastructure as a percentage of GDP. And the key takeaway here is that developing countries are only investing in digital technologies at half the rate of their developed counterparts. So what both these diagrams together tell us is that if this digital divide is not bridged, developing countries risk being bypassed by this new global digital economy, not least to mention the implications this has on achieving zero carbon and other sustainability targets. So a lot of work has been done by various organizations to understand what the barriers to digital transformation are. So I'll talk about two. So for example, UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, has established a global initiative or a partnership called the E-Trade for All Network, with the aim to connect dots between beneficiary countries, partners, and donors who are all working to help developing countries harness the potential of e-commerce for sustainable development, of which now BSI has become a member. And one of UNCTAD's key activities is applying this tool called the e-readiness assessment tool in developing countries to measure the readiness of these countries to engage in e-commerce. And they have captured the barriers in a framework of 7 themes, such as access to finance, infrastructure, skills, legal and regulatory framework, etc., but really emphasizing that digitalization is multifaceted and a holistic and integrated approach is essential for success of the developing countries. And then on the other hand, the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report from 2020 puts a spotlight on a barrier that is of a bit of a different nature, namely that of trust. So here the report revealed that a key concern of organizations operating in the digital space is a risk of cyber attack, information infrastructure breakdown, theft, etc. So to address this issue of lack of trust in digital technology and to provide assurance that the digital economy is reliable, secure, and efficient, different mandatory and voluntary instruments need to be deployed. So while legislation and regulation are absolutely necessary to tackle issues around trust, in a fast-moving digital world, standards offer policymakers an additional tool that is an agile process to keep up with the rapidly evolving digital technology and achieve their public policy objectives. So international standards, which are stakeholder-driven and consensus-based, are widely accepted as proven methodologies and practical tools to accelerate change in business processes and customer relationships. So in the UK and elsewhere in the developed world, international standards have played a key role in promoting digitalization and addressing concerns around cybersecurity, network interoperability, digital ID, data management, and privacy. So when we were developing this white paper as part of the process, we conducted some research to understand the level of uptake of standards in these 4 key areas in the Caribbean and Africa region. And basically the results showed us that it was non-existent. And we wanted to understand a bit further in terms of what the barriers are, and what clearly stood out was that there is a lack of clarity on what are the critical standards that companies or private sector should work towards to meet their objectives and ultimately integrate into global value chains. So I'll come back to that to say what we're doing in terms of that, but just continuing on. So we believe international standards together with the quality infrastructure system are the missing keystone in this bridge to a digital society. So standards for the reasons I outlined earlier, but just to summarize, basically by building trust in the innovative application of new technology and opening up global value chains. But it's not just standards. There's a lot of power within the national standards bodies because they can be an agent of change to drive transformation in the economy through convening stakeholders and co-creating solutions that reflect international good practice. I'm sure you're all aware of this. And also the fact that they can advise government and industry on creating alignment of different and diverse systems, ensuring semantic interoperability. And this is critical because national standards bodies are not to date perceived as an agent for change in the developing countries. So to make sure that they have this status is something, you know, it requires a mindset shift. Then there is certification schemes and trust marks. So although standards underpin trust and inspire confidence in digital products and services, accredited certification schemes, which are underpinned by standards, provide higher levels of assurance to customers. They ultimately confirm to them that the company's digital offering has been thoroughly tested, validated, assured, and that too on a regular basis, and they prove to meet minimum quality thresholds. And then finally, standard certification and government procurement. So in the UK, there is a growing trend towards requiring firms to certify to ISO 27001 if they wish to bid for government contracts, especially those that require high levels of security, handling sensitive and personal data, etc. So this is a powerful way, we think, to mitigate risk and to ensure that there is quality and trust in these new digital systems. So the paper makes 5 broad recommendations. I will go through all 5 and provide an update on how each has been taken up, and then focus on recommendation number 2, the digitalization toolkit. So the first recommendation is to include a review of the role of the national quality infrastructure system in the UNCTAD's e-trade readiness assessment policy tool. And we're very pleased and grateful to UNCTAD for immediately responding to this recommendation and incorporating it into their tool. And this version of the tool is actually being applied in Kenya at the moment. The second recommendation is to develop a digitalization toolkit based on international standards to support and guide developing countries. And we at BSI have taken on the lead to develop this. So I'll come back to this a bit later. The third recommendation is to develop international certification schemes. So based on our engagement with experts from different regions, what we see is that there is a general demand for a trust mark in the area of e-commerce, particularly within the ASEAN region, and we're seeing how to take that forward, potentially with the international network and quality infrastructure. So the fourth recommendation is to use standards in government procurement policy, which we will take forward in 2 ways. One, as a result of the e-trade readiness assessment tools results, so recommendation 1, and 2, incorporating this concept of standards in support of public procurement in recommendation number 2, the toolkit. And the fifth and final recommendation is to deliver public-private partnership transformational programs. So we are under no illusion that standards are the be-all and end-all, and we know that digital transformation is multifaceted and requires a holistic and integrated approach. So we are engaging with development banks, donors, and partners to see how we can really enable this transformation, to join forces, co-create solutions, and incorporate standards as a means to mitigate risk and tap into further funding to support this transformation, as we know that is one of the key barriers. Okay, so the use of standards obviously differs widely between countries, as Ben has mentioned, through the Commonwealth Standards Network. You know, it's absolutely diverse. So the speed at which we can support the standards ecosystem will also be different. So the process will take time, but the aim should be to develop programs to raise all developing countries to at least an intermediate on their way to an advanced status within the next 3 to 5 years as part of a wider approach to digitalization, including infrastructure and skills. And we believe that quality and standards will provide a solid base for active participation in global value chains by SMEs. And it is this virtuous cycle that will lead to more confidence in digital technologies, e-commerce, higher quality jobs, and improved finance for SMEs. So now focusing on recommendation number 2, as we believe this is instrumental in addressing the challenges laid out earlier to support developing countries, it is a standards-based digitalization toolkit. So the aim of the toolkit is to provide national standards bodies, government departments, and development banks with a much better understanding of the role standards can play in facilitating digitalization at the policy, sectoral, and firm level. So at its core, the toolkit will simplify and provide guidance on what are the key standards that address concerns in these 4 areas within the National Digital Resilience bubble here. So system security, data management, privacy, digital ID, and interoperability. So this really speaks to the need that we identified working with our developing country counterparts. So by undergoing this training program, so the toolkit comprises of a training program, it will enable national standards bodies to cascade this knowledge to the public and private sector. It will provide governments more assurance, make them feel more comfortable to use standards in their policies, regulations, and procurement, and also for the development banks to include it in their lending strategies as a means to mitigate risk. So what we as BSI are developing at the moment is items A and B, so the core toolkit. The training program will have 6 modules. 2 to 5 are the core digital themes, and 6 is to demonstrate how NSBs can support the economy in various ways, be it through procurement, training, providing assistance to SMEs, etc. So the possible way the toolkit could evolve is that if, for example, in a technical assistance program, there is a specific need to digitally transform, let's say, the agricultural or tourism sector, in that case, there may be some specific standards that may need to be slotted into the toolkit accordingly to cater for this specific sector. So yes, we would like to welcome the views of the people on this call. So from your experience, do you think there is a need or a demand to develop the toolkit in a specific strategic sector that could help LDCs cope with the transformation? So yes, it would be helpful if you could put your comments in the chat and we can take it from there if you have any questions. I'll also post the link to the white paper in the chat. So yes, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you. Let me stop sharing my screen. Right.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cindy. Thanks very much. And thanks, Ben, as well. I hope people found that interesting and a slightly different view from sometimes of the things that we cover at this event, but just shows the power for me of how some quite straightforward and simple techniques can drive a lot of progress and really spread the value of standards a lot wider. We have got some great questions that have just been coming through in the last couple of minutes. Ben, Cindy, I'm not sure if you can see them, but I shall just drive through them, and then I think, feel free to chip in from a perspective of both of your programs. So the first one is around languages. So how is BSI managing the language barrier, or in terms of the actual programs, but also in terms of, the standards themselves and the drafting, searching, archiving of standards, etc. How's that being tackled? Ben, shall I ask you first, maybe?
Sure, yeah, I'll go ahead. And also Cindy had also worked on the CSN for the Africa Technical Assistance Program, and so she's got some good knowledge of how the technical assistance work there. And specifically, one of the things that happened there was translating. Remember, I said earlier, particularly for agriculture and fishing sectors, the simplification of standards for the audience there. Part of that work was to translate those standards into local dialects, and there are many dialects in this, particularly in the work in Uganda. And so trying to work with the NSB to find, because it can change just between different parts of Uganda, completely different languages. So quite a lot of different translations were made depending on the sectors and which people were working in those sectors to simplify these standards, which had otherwise only been available a lot of the time in English and as quite technical documents. So that was done specifically on a technical assistance level. On the wider network level, it wasn't too much of an issue, because that's one advantage of the Commonwealth, is that English is a commonly spoken language, at least a commonly spoken language of business anyway. So we could produce the website and all of the written resources in English, and it would be, you know, the vast majority of people around the Commonwealth would be able to read it, or the NSBs, people at the NSBs would be able to use it to then translate into their local languages. Something that we had to pitch a bit as the wider sort of network level were the potential for cultural differences, and so everything was put at this level that was quite what would the word be, very overarching. I'd say that it has to be suitable for all audiences. If you're considering Pacific Islands, or you know, West African countries, or if it's Sri Lanka, these overarching concepts of how an NSB can potentially make their business work better, how potentially you can get more stakeholders involved, why that's an important thing, how you can pitch the idea of using international standards to your stakeholders. All of these things were quite universal, so we didn't need to get too specific. But like I say, the technical assistance programs did get more specific because they were embedded within those countries. So
may I just jump in?
Yeah, please go ahead, Cynthia.
Okay, no, sorry. So Ben mentioned in terms of translating into local languages, but I think before we get to local languages, there is this huge issue of the people that we're working with, farmers, let's say, not being literate. So we had to tackle this literacy issue, and what we did there was use pictograms and really simplify the key messages within the standards by using other means of communication, and that proved to be very, very successful. Yes, so that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's great, Cindy, because that was another question we've got here, is about cultural diversity. Yeah. And you know, the different level of you know, the sophistication of what you're having to deal with, and I don't know if you've got any other examples like that, where, you know, how have we addressed those differences as we've moved forward?
Yes, so we also organized train the trainer kind of workshops where we worked with specific farmers associations, let's say, to really reach farmers in the rural area, and to build the capacity locally as well. I mean, we didn't want to just come in and train up the people and leave. We wanted to make sure that, you know, this knowledge that we're transferring is really embedded in the systems and is going to be available even post the project.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Ben, anything to add on that one?
No, only to say that this was, yes, the program, obviously there's huge differences economically, culturally, language-wise throughout the Commonwealth. But what we found throughout, whether it's the Caribbean Technical Assistance, African, Oceania, or the overarching program, is that the general needs of the NSBs and the stakeholders are pretty similar across the Commonwealth. And when you start talking about things like the value of international trade, the value of using international standards, technical barriers to trade, how you reference international standards within your regulations, these things are quite universal. Obviously, each country does things quite differently, but the overarching concepts remain the same. And so we were able to to put that together in various documents, whether they be roadmaps for NSBs, guide documents, or otherwise across the network, and then use the technical assistance programs to really get embedded within the countries and really get down to that finer level of dealing with, say, a specific farming community in Uganda, or something in the Caribbean. So yes, although it's very diverse, I think there are some universal sort of truths to the work that we're doing.
I think your comments, Cindy, as well around the pictograms, changing standards into pictograms. I think we could all learn a lot from that in terms of simplifying standards and making them consumable. But yeah, I think it would probably be quite interesting for this group to share one at some point, maybe after the event, if we could share some examples of how that's been done, because it's really interesting indeed. Another question just around measurement and how we measure success on this. Have we got big KPIs in place for the for the stakeholders and their use of the program? So I can imagine, was there a lot of user experience research required to set up the program to understand how you were going to provide these programs to these user bases? Shall I start with Cindy on that one? So there's two questions there really. So what's our measures of success, I suppose, KPIs for the program, and then how did we design the programs to drive usage?
Sure. So I'll focus on the technical assistance activities and I'll let Ben speak about the network. So in terms of the technical assistance, I mean, the ultimate goal, what we want is that companies work towards international standards. So it's basically the uptake and the purchase of these specific standards. So that was our main key indicator. But as we know, the reality, it's a long process to measure that change. So it was more in terms of looking at, are these SMEs working towards the specific standards? If yes, which ones? And track them throughout the process to see if there is some sort of improvement in terms of integrating into global value chains. Are they, by working with these standards, are the products of better quality? Are the farmers getting better price for the produce that they're producing? So that is the basic theory of change that we were working towards.
Great. And Ben, have you got a view there on those elements?
Yes, yeah. Basically, on the overarching network side, so the funding for the development of the network was coming from the UK government departments, from the UK aid budget. So as far as reporting on KPIs, we had quite specific things that we were reporting to them. What we found is that they're very specific. They're things like a certain amount of training courses will be delivered to a certain amount of people, and this will be measured by survey responses and what percentage of the responses are positive. So that's how we would report things on that. What we found that would be useful, but is a much more tricky long-term thing to do, is to not just report on those sort of figures of this is what we have delivered, but on the long-term impacts of these things, how this has had positive developmental outcomes within those countries. We can look at that in certain ways, but it's a much more difficult thing to give specific figures for. You can do things like say how many international standards have been adopted, how many more people are using them. You can run surveys. We did more than 100 different surveys, I found, because each training course had a survey. Each of the technical assistance programs with their specific courses had surveys. All of the online content has that, and all the collaborative aspects of developing the documents as we go along, asking the stakeholders what they would need from things like e-learning and stuff. But yes, a bigger challenge, which is quite a long-term thing, you really need quite a few years to look at it, is not just how many training courses have you developed, how many documents have been delivered, and not even just how many more international standards have been adopted. It's that next stage of how has this positively affected the economy, which I know lots of NSBs, BSI has done a study, CEBR studies, and we did this through good practice guidance documents, looking at where NSBs have used these these methods of measuring how standards have positively affected change as a basis for the work we did. But obviously it's a tricky thing to get into the specifics of that.
And I know a lot of us are all struggling with not just measuring distribution, but you know, this really brings home the need to measure the true impact of standards and the change that we're making as organizations. It's a really sort of fascinating area. Cindy, there's a couple of questions here. I'll tie them together. It's really about partnerships. So our colleagues are wondering whether industry partners or academia and other non-profits or foundations are supporting these activities, what connections we've got out there. I can imagine this isn't just BSI ploughing a furrow on its own. So can you perhaps give us insight into those different connections that we've got?
Absolutely. So I'll focus on the digitalization program that I'm leading right now. So the work we're doing there. So as I mentioned, we started off this whole work by partnering with UNCTAD, so the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and their E-Trade for All network, which is the network of 34 members consisting of development banks, international organizations, as well as private sector organizations. So it is a powerful network that we call upon when we need support. So we are closely working with the UN. We're looking for partners to work with to take this forward. So if there are any organizations that are interested, if you are interested to get involved, please do get in touch and we can see how to take it forward. But most definitely we are working with partners, and especially in these developing countries. So as I mentioned, UNCTAD is applying the E-Trade Readiness Assessment tool in Kenya to see what are the barriers, and the output of this assessment is a roadmap in terms of what are the key barriers that needs to be addressed. And then different members from the E-Trade for All network can pick out which are the ones, you know, that they can support, and then work with other members to make this a reality. And private sector institutions within the developing countries are critical. Then another key organization that we're working with is the African Development Bank. Of being a development bank, they bring to the table finance, which is what is absolutely required for this transformation to be successful. Then another example is in the ASEAN region. We're working with research institutions to understand what are the barriers and see how we can tailor our support and help developing countries. So yes, we are working with a sphere of different organizations.
Right, thanks, Cindy. Yeah, and Ben, forgive us if it was in your slides. Just I wasn't sure if there was a connection there as well for CSM, whether you're partnering with others.
We are, and we're going to be increasingly doing that. We've got 31 associate members who include regional organizations like ARSO, CrossQ, and the Pacific Islands Forum. So we're working quite closely with them. It's still carrying on the same objective to increase the use of international standards, get more NSBs involved in their development as well and their adoptions. But we're also now going to be increasingly working with the Commonwealth Secretariat, who deal directly with the trade ministries in governments. So the Commonwealth Head of Government meeting that will probably be in Rwanda next year, there may well be announcements on these things, and they're working on very similar programs, but it's a little bit more once removed from the standards world and NSBs. They're working more with government departments. So they've got a digitization piece, and they've also got a trade piece that they're working on as well, clusters they call them. And so we're going to be with the CSM working more closely with them on the trade piece, on how standards can support trade and development, and probably with Cindy's digitization work, working more closely with them on their digitization work. They're a good grouping to get a little bit outside the usual sort of NSB contacts that we work with and start working with different ministries in government.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just going to finish up with one quick last question because we're running out of time. So in terms of both of the pieces of work, where do you see them being in 3 to 5 years' time? Should we start with the CSN and then we'll talk to Cindy about the other program?
Sure, CSN, I think there's a lot of value, there's a lot of demand for the work that it's been doing. So I see it continuing in a similar vein to how it has been. We've got nearly every Commonwealth country signed up. So we're not trying to expand the network any further, and we're not actively trying to get more associate members. I think we've got to a good point now without spreading ourselves too thin. We will continue to partner with different organizations, perhaps look into new technical assistance programs. There's a lot of demand from different countries for technical assistance. What we will need for that is different donors, potentially UK government to fund more technical assistance programs, potentially other donors from throughout the Commonwealth or other countries, different intergovernmental organizations. Without that though, BSI is continuing to support the network as a network with the resources it has, as a collaborative network to share information and promote good practice and the development of international standards. So I think it will carry much in a similar sort of vein to how it has been. Depending on the funding, depends on how much technical assistance we can do.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. And Cindy, just to round up.
So building on what Ben said, where I would like us to be in 5 years is to have truly transformational programs that are public and private, based on public and private partnerships that digitally transform specific sectors built on standards, really underpinned by standards, where governments, national standards bodies, and private sector are comfortable with the concept of standards. It's embedded in public, in government procurement policies, and also standards are seen as a policy tool. So it's a lot of like mindset shift, but that is where we're aiming towards.
Perfect. Thanks, Cindy, and thanks both of you for bringing something very different to the table for our event this year. So thanks very much, and thanks everyone for all your questions. I think we got through most of them. Those that we didn't, as always, we'll make sure that they're reviewed. I think we answered some of them in the course of the presentations as well. So with that, I'll hand back to Lakshmi, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ben, Cindy, Simon. Great session. Something new, which we love, and hearing about the developing countries and what BSI is doing is wonderful. A really important work. So thank you all very much. With that, we are going to go to break. As Simon said, if there are questions that we weren't able to get to, please go ahead and send them to my attention. I will follow up with our session organizers. So Simon will follow up with Ben and Cindy to get some of those unanswered questions answered for you. Thank you again, and we will meet back in about 10 minutes. So about 12 after 10 Eastern Standard Time, we will see you. Thank you.
Can you see me now?